So hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm going to introduce you to Kendall Smith, author of Rookie Father, a playbook for men experiencing fatherhood for the first time. And boy, I could have used that in 2002. Kendall's work also includes self-help, fiction, and satire. He's a dedicated father and husband living in New Jersey. His core focus is fatherhood and providing relevant, pragmatic advice to new dads. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Kendall Smith.
Thank you, Michael. Pleasure to be here.
All righty. So I'm curious, Kendall, where does your story as a writer begin?
Well, I've loved writing since I was a kid, and I actually had a eighth grade teacher on my graduation from middle school who gave me a blank book, and it was filled with blank pages, and she inscribed in it, "You got a talent for writing, keep doing it." And I came back to it when I was 34 and penned my first thriller, and I've stuck with it since. It's just one of these hobbies that I've worked on and built up my skill set that I've loved and enjoyed doing for years now.
You know, it's so interesting that you say, you had somebody kind of encourage you. That's one of the themes that I hear so often is that somewhere in someone's life, and usually it's early on, like grammar school, they say, I had a teacher who saw something in me and they took me aside and they said something. The guy I just interviewed, that happened to him. And, you're going to love this. The person who encouraged him was none other than Wally Lamb, who, big Oprah book club, She's Come Undone. Yeah. And I'm like, wow, getting encouragement from someone like that is pretty amazing. But encouragement, for authors, for writers, so important, isn't it?
It is. And then once you start dabbling in it and you start, again, experiment with different kinds of stories, and it starts to kind of build momentum. And what I found is for me, is the more honest and open I was in what I wrote about in the nonfiction space, the better. It just felt cathartic on some level. And in this book, there was some level of redemption for me to get out on the table, what it was like to grow up without a father, and to pen advice that was helpful for men.
Yeah. I want to dig into that in a minute, but before I do, were you always a writer? I mean, was this your first profession? Did you have another hat that you were wearing before writing books?
I have been a white collar worker in New York City in different corporate jobs, in different marketing sales jobs my whole life. I still am. This is not my day job. I write at 5:30 in the morning, and I get up and I write before my commute when I am commuting. And it's a hobby that's grown, but this is not paid. I didn't write this book for the money. I wrote it to help other fathers. And there's 19 million of us that are raised in absence of a father. Mm-hmm. And that could use some practical and actionable advice when they become fathers themselves.
Yeah, so I was curious, it is a very specific book, sort of a playbook for men experiencing fatherhood for the first time. Tell me what was the really driving motivation behind writing this piece of nonfiction?
So my son was about a year old. And at that point, I had already written 3 thrillers, and I was just doing some soul searching, like, what else can I write? Let me change things up. Let me get out of the fiction world for a while. And what I started to do is brainstorm on all the advice that I had been given growing up, out of just becoming a dad and loving the experience and the responsibility. And I realized there's nothing out there that gives, first of all, there's not a lot of content, advice books for men, for new dads. And then from my perspective, what can be unique is that I didn't have a blueprint from my father growing up. I had to figure that out on my own. So how can I have other dads do the same thing? And that's what kind of inspired it. And then it continued from there.
Yeah. I always like to say, kids, and you're speaking to the father of triplets here. They don't come with instruction manuals, right? So,
Right.
my wife and I went from having 0 kids to 3 kids, literally in the span of 3 minutes, 207, 208, 209 in the morning. And, the best we had, at our disposal was like the lessons our parents taught us. Right. And we had, their behavior to model after. But as you point out, not everyone grows up in 2-parent households, and certainly not everyone grows up with a dad present. So what were some of the lessons you learned as you were researching, doing research for this book?
One, that patience is the top priority. You have to exude patience when you have kids. 2 is that you've got to be a sponge to absorb as much advice and suggestions as you can get. So the more family you can bring into the tent in-laws, relatives, get their perspective, get their help. Every parent does it with the absence of with an instruction manual. So you're figuring things out as you go along. But it's also unique when you never parented yourself and you get past year 2, year 3, and all of a sudden, like, now you're a role model. You're not just there to change the diapers. You're not there to do a feeding at 3 a.m. in the morning. Like, you get more involved, and your role as the role model that you are, it magnifies as you go through your child's life.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. I was talking to an author a couple weeks ago who wrote a book, nonfiction on sort of healing, kind of healing from attachment wounds. It was called Healthy Adult, and it was really kind of exploring. We all attach in different ways, right? And we learn that from the ways we attach, basically, to our parents. So I'm curious, when you were kind of writing this book, did you have any hypotheses in mind as you were kind of going through it? Did you have any things that you were trying to, I don't want to say prove, but any points you were trying to support?
The number one thing that my goal was, when I started, was to be there, because every day have a role in my child's life, support my wife, be as present as you possibly can. And now with COVID, we're here all the time. So, which can be a catch-22 sometimes. But that was the core philosophy I wanted to bring, because my dad was not around. From the age of 6, my parents separated. He moved to Florida. They were divorced when I turned 9. And it had an impact on me. But I just thought, okay, by sticking around and being ever present and learning from my own mistakes, every parent does it. And if you continue to make the same mistakes again and not learn from it, that's the definition of insanity. Mm-hmm. So you're not going to get a different outcome. So you have to learn and adapt as you go along.
Yeah. As you were writing this book, did you interview anybody? I mean, did you talk to like other fathers? Did you? And I'm curious to know, like, and if you talk to people from like different generations, I'm really interested to know like how their take on fatherhood may have been different based on sort of their own age.
Yeah, the book consists of basically all the practical advice that I observed from dads growing up, from other dads I spoke to, different generations. So the irony is that some of the advice that I convey that I found useful, it's not even advice that I came up with. I observed it and I shared it. My secret sauce is how I convey it. And that's 1 or 2 page chapters. It's succinct, it's actionable. It's not a lengthy 25-page self-help chapter that no man's going to read, doesn't have the time. And if you're a new dad, you have less time than any other man. So that's kind of the crux of what the book's about.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a smart sort of decision you made, having short chapters, because, just kind of being in the sort of publishing world, now for about 7 or 8 years. Yeah. It's not men who are buying books, right? Like, most people, if you look demographically, most of our buyers are women, and we have very short attention spans. So that's sort of kudos on that strategic decision there. But I'm curious as your take on fathers, as they're portrayed in media. So because I look and yeah, I mean, I have my own biases, but I think I'm a very involved dad. When you have triplets, like you're on zone defense and there's no
That's awesome. Zone defense, I love it.
You're on zone, and so there's no man to man. So very, very involved, but I look and see how dads are typically portrayed in sitcoms or TV media. What's your take on that? How fathers are portrayed these days?
It's a disgrace, and not every show does it. But I have written about this. I have a chapter in my book called "Shun the Idiot Father" or "Media Dad," and it goes back to Homer Simpson, and you can go back to Griswold behind that. And if it's once in a while, it's fine. But the consistency, less so now compared to 10 years ago. But the dad was the laughing stock of the family. And then the irony is that people immediately say, well, men aren't as involved as it used to be. They're not going to college as often. Maybe they're not motivated because they have examples that are poor to begin with. Right. So whenever I see a commercial, and I encourage all of us to do this, is that when you see a commercial that portrays a dad as an idiot, You give the bird to the commercial and you just agree not to buy their products. And if you are so inclined, go on social media, tag them, and express your displeasure at how they're portraying dads and men.
Yeah, no, I get it. And it's interesting, you say, there's a perception maybe that dads aren't involved now. I mean, I look at, and again, focus group here of one, but
Right.
I look at all the time I spent with my kids when they were younger. Now they're 19 now, so they're all off in college. But I did so much more with my kids than what my dad. And I'm not saying my dad wasn't involved. He was very involved. I mean, lots of sports in the backyard, golf and taking us things in the weekend, sports events, all that kind of stuff. But, in terms of, a lot of the stuff that my mom used to do, I took on a lot of those roles. And I think I see a lot of like my contemporaries kind of doing similar things. I mean, I think parenting is a much more of a shared responsibility, the way I see it in today's culture than it was certainly in a previous generation.
Yeah, it's evolving. Props to you, and I think a lot of men feel that, and you can see it. Um, and it's a great thing, and I think that also is kind of the reverb from the 70s and early 80s when divorce was rampant, and that 50s dad mentality was still like in place, and the expectations were, I'm doing my own thing, you do your own thing. I think we're seeing a lot more involvement, and I encourage that. I also encourage, though, at a certain age, let your kids explore, give them some autonomy. You don't want, if you're always involved with your parent-child's life, they're always going to come back to you, and you want to promote autonomy as a parent. And that's letting them in the backyard, like do their own thing, use their imagination off of the iPad, off of TV, and get outside and explore a little bit. So that's something else that I've started to hone in on, as giving Connor, my son, some free time to himself with his friends outside.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I get, I don't want to say angry. Maybe anxious is the right word when I see like helicopter parents just kind of swooping in. I
Yeah.
even see it now. We've got three kids in college. Two of them go to the University of Connecticut. One of them goes
Great.
to Sacred Heart University.
Wow.
And we're members, my wife and I were members of, the parents of the class of 2024 on both sides. And just seeing how these parents are just interacting, asking questions like, hey, my son, didn't get enough food from the dining hall. This is a disgrace and we won't stand for this. And I'm like, why are you complaining about what's happening with your kids, or that they're trying to problem solve? And it to me, it's driving me crazy the way, parents are behaving on these social media sites.
Yeah, it's a great point. And then if you don't, you have to, again, it gets back to autonomy. Stand up for yourself. Go back and say, I'm not getting enough food, and like make a stink. If encourage your child to make a stink himself. Yeah, I think I've seen the result of helicopter parenting when the kids get into their early and mid-20s, and it's a train wreck. It's an absolute train wreck because they're coming back for advice every single day. Like, make some decisions on your own. And that's why I think that giving kids enough encouragement to be their own person, there has to be a part of that on a weekly, if not daily basis.
Mhm.
So they can really self-identify and then tell them to stand up for themselves.
So you talk to me a little bit about the differences between writing fiction and nonfiction, because, I've talked to, a few authors about kind of making that pivot. Right. So it sounds like you started off kind of writing thrillers. Nonfiction is obviously, it's a different animal. How different is the writing process for it? And, kind of how different is the, almost publication process, if you could speak to either of those?
So in fiction, your characters and your plot have to be rock solid. You have to have a good strategy. The characters in particular, you have to really hone in on what are their desires, what are their needs, what are their ambitions. Nonfiction, in this sense, what I wanted to do is I started when I sat down. Again, my son was a year old. This is about 5 years ago, and I looked at what is the most pertinent advice I can give. How can I give it in a succinct manner? And I brainstormed. And I literally came up with 50 different chapters. And as I went through the process of writing, I removed duplicative chapters. So it wasn't wasted space. And then I looked at, okay, how can I group these pieces of advice under certain sections? And for me, it was, I removed myself as much as I could from the story. So the advice is conveyed in a way that the reader could act on it. It's not, here's what I did. I was a great dad. And like, no one cares. Like literally, I'm the least important person when someone's reading this book. The most important person is your child. And the advice is it's given in a manner that you can actually act on.
Yeah. As you were kind of going through it and you were outlining kind of like your chapters, was there one or two that you were particularly passionate about, that really spoke to you, that you wanted to make sure that you really nailed?
I think it was at the end, two things. One was when you think about your fatherhood and you're just starting, you will establish a legacy for yourself. And when you leave this world, hopefully in 30, 40, 70 years, whatever, if you can look back in your life and do one critical thing besides being present, you could establish a great legacy. And that one thing to do is to be able to communicate, express your feelings, be able to communicate succinctly, and just keep an open flow of communication. Because the more that comes in, the more that comes out, it's creates stability in your marriage. It promotes more honesty with your child, which is critical when you get to the teenage years. And it's going to leave a more positive, lasting impression than whatever you had if you grew up without a father. You could almost realign your lineage in your family in a much more positive direction.
Mm-hmm. What's the secret to communication? Because that's something that has been coming up a lot, in my personal life, but also in some of these interviews I do, where specifically with men have a hard time communicating feelings. I mean, this isn't new news, but men have a harder time with vulnerability, and it's increasingly important to show, I think anyway, to show our kids, our spouses, that we are not perfect, that we have sadness, that we have had failures, that we have, that we battle with, sad thoughts at times. But men, I think in culture, we're kind of taught to kind of hide that stuff. Any words of advice on being able to communicate our vulnerability more?
I think the easiest thing, actually easiest, it's a hard subject for guys because they have egos. And you're almost genetically encoded not to show weakness. That's just what we do. That can boil up. And what happens is that when that boils up, if resentment builds, it comes across as a huge fight. And that's the worst thing that can happen between you and your spouse. So I have a section in my book called empathetic communication. My mother taught this to me when she was getting her master's in as a therapist, as a counselor, I should say. She got a degree in counseling. And that is, if you can phrase how you feel in a way that conveys to a person what you're feeling in a way that is not too vulnerable, it's going to help you express yourself in a way that's not going to result in a fight. And what I do is, if you can phrase it in the way is, honey, when you do this, it makes me feel like Y. And I feel like that is a negative consequence. So in the book, I talk about a wife who's badgering her husband to like take care of multiple things in the house, and he has to shovel the driveway. And I say, okay, here's how to phrase it. Honey, when you tell me to take out the trash and straighten up the rooms, but I have to shovel the driveway, it makes me feel like I'm letting you down, when all I'm trying to do is prioritize what's most important, which is getting our driveway clear. And if you, at first when you do it, it's hard to swallow, but then you'll see the reaction. And that reaction it's an emotional response to how you're feeling emotionally. And that levels the playing field. And it's a great way to avoid the huffing, the puffing, the yelling, the name calling, which can happen. And once you see the response, it helps to clear the air almost immediately. It really helps.
Right.
And that's what I advise in the book.
Yeah. That's a great piece. You should give a seminar on this.
Okay. Maybe I'll do it.
$100 a head. It's brilliant. And do some role playing. I think would be fantastic. Okay, I can't help but notice the guitar in your background. Do you play?
Well, I can play acoustic, all rhythm guitar, but it's hard because whenever I get looped into playing projects, I'm a drummer by trade.
Okay.
Drums to me is like it's my golf per se. It's my passion. So I'm in a band called Dracar and the Noirs. We're a cover band in Northern Jersey. We're going to do a little global tour at about 6 different spots in New Jersey, New York this summer. but I can't get away from the drums, so I'm not that good at guitar yet. And I
Right.
probably
I love the name. I mean, I can smell it. I can just smell that. That takes me right back to high school.
yeah, yeah. I didn't pick the band name. They brought me in as the new drummer, and I just absorbed the name as it was, and it is what it is. So
The previous drummer didn't spontaneously combust like in Spinal Tap, did he? Or
I rumor has it he did, but he may come back in the form of a ghost. So we'll see what happens.
very good. Well, I've got a few hot seat questions for you. These are questions I ask all of my guests here, and we'll see how you do. They're not hard, but some can be more challenging than others. First up would be, Ken, what was your favorite TV show when you were a kid?
Oh, interesting. My favorite show. It was probably Batman and Robin.
Ooh,
the 60s show.
The old one, right? Adam West and who played Robin? Burt something.
Burt Ward.
Burt Ward. Thank you very much, Burt Ward. Yeah, all those villains were so great. You had Cesar Romero, you had Frank Gorshin, Mickey from Rocky, Burgess Meredith as the Penguin.
But the Catwoman was the one. I would run home to see the Catwoman.
Eartha Kitt.
No, it was the other
Not
one.
Eartha Kitt. There were two. Were there two Catwomen?
There were two. The first one, and I'm blanking on her name, but I had the hots for her when I was 6 years old. I still do whenever I turn on the show. I'm like, oh my God, there she is.
There she is. Wow.
There she is.
It's so funny how Batman has changed so much from that 60s show. I mean, I was certainly familiar with it to like where it is now. It's so dark, and I guess maybe that's a lot more true to the character, but that show is certainly indicative of that time in history in the sort of the 60s. All right, Batman and Robin, there we go. Question number 2, how do you feel when you're staring at a blank piece of paper or a blank computer screen when you're about to write something?
Just start. The more you think about starting, the harder it is to start. So just your first sentence can end up being your third. It doesn't matter. Just get it on paper, and just be honest when you write. And that's what I did. What I did in this book, I literally revealed. I hid nothing back in this book, and it helped because it personalizes the story for the reader.
Okay. Number 3, what lesson about writing or publishing do you feel like you had to learn the hard way?
That it is extremely difficult to get published, and don't do it for the money. Do it for your passion, and know that if your book is not picked up by an agent and you're not on a global tour to sell 1 million copies and you're buying a Rolls Royce, with the royalties, it ain't going to happen. But it's incredibly rewarding, and they're self-publishing now. I've self-published two novels that are still on Amazon, and it's exciting to get your work out there and just get past that first book, and then more will follow. And then if you learn and get feedback from readers and you apply that, you'll be able to become a better writer. And I had to go through 10 years of that before I even came close to getting published.
Yeah, I mean, there are no overnight successes here, even though some people seem to come out of thin air. But I love what you say in terms of if you think about you think you're going to make $1 million doing this, you may want to reset those expectations. I have 8 novels out, and people in my industry. I mean, I work in the market research industry. I moderate focus groups for a living. Are like, we can't believe you're still doing this. I'll run into people I know in like airports and back rooms and facilities. I'm like, what do you think? They're, well, you have all these books, and I'm like, I've got 3 kids in college. I'm like, I will be asking people about Dove soap for a very long time.
I write at 5:30 in the morning, and I have my day job. I'm taking today off from work, and I'll be back at it Monday at 9 a.m. In the new job. And I do not foresee myself quitting, but when I'm writing, it's early, so I can get it done during the day or in the morning.
Right. Well, this could be a build on your previous response, but what's the best piece of advice you could give to an aspiring author who's looking for advice?
Sure. One of the books that I read after I wrote my first novel was called On Writing by Stephen King. If you want to start, read that book first. The first piece of advice he gives is you need a toolbox and a skill set to go into writing. If not, your grammar, your sentence structure, all these little flaws are going to pop up in your manuscript, and you're going to spend eons editing it down. And eventually you're going to have to hire an editor at a very high price to do your work. It's a craft that you have to do consistently. And you also need to read. So if you want to write a great thriller, read the top 20 thrillers of all time. Get them in your head, see how they process. There's a narrative to each kind of genre of writing that you can follow and make your own, of course. But if you stray too far from it, you're not going to be picked up and you're not going to get through.
Yeah. Excellent piece of advice. The best, if you're not a reader, and you want to be a writer, you've got your work cut out for you. When I was looking for, an agent, I was fortunate enough to talk to a few editors, and their first question to me was always, "So, who do you like to read?" I mean, everyone asked me the same first question, and I am a reader. I mean, I've been an avid reader since I was a kid,
Yeah.
but that's like their first. It's their first clue as to whether or not you might be the real deal or not. So I totally agree with you on that. This last one is my I call it my Brad Paisley letter to me question, because if you're familiar with that song, he writes a letter to his younger self and he gives himself advice. So if you could write a letter to your younger self, Kendall, what kind of advice would you give to your younger self? It doesn't have to be about writing, could be about life in general.
I think it's that I would tell myself, bear in mind that whatever you endured in your childhood, watching your parents separate, divorce, a new child represents a clean slate, and you can craft your path of fathering however you'd like, and be patient and know that your child, it's a fresh start, and you can correct a lot of the imbalances that you experienced when you get later in life and become a dad yourself.
Did you, that response just kind of begs the question. Did you ever wind up having a relationship with your birth father?
Nope. We moved out at 12. I was estranged with him since the age of 13. I saw him once when I was 17. And then he essentially wrote me out of his life and vice versa. And there was no healing that before he passed away.
Oh, all right. Well, I'm sorry to hear that that's how that part of the story ended, but
yeah, it was tough. It was tough, but it is what it is. And you just got to move forward. And I think when you become a parent, you don't have a lot of time to self-reflect on what you went through. It kind of boils up and you have to address it. If you're in the same role that I was growing up and when I became a dad, and you do, it's extremely healthy and extremely progressive. And the interesting thing also is, now that I've been a dad for 6+ years, is that those feelings of anxiety and like regret, they come up less and less often, because you're a dad every day and you're doing something fun, and like you're taking your son to the beach. I took him up to upstate New York this summer. We did a daddy son trip. It was awesome. And like that kind of stuff starts to build, and you have warmer and fuzzier memories of family the older you get in life, if you continue to do that with your kids.
Yeah. Very good. Well, Rookie Father is the book, a playbook for men experiencing fatherhood for the first time. I'm conscious of the fact that, we're still in February as we're recording this. June is far away, but Father's Day will be coming up at some point. It sounds like it'd be a perfect book to give an expectant father for Father's Day. Tell me, where can people buy the book if they wanted to buy it today?
Sure. It's available at all national and local booksellers. You can order on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I encourage people, go to local bookstores, support your local businesses. You can go to therookiefather.com. All the retail links are there, the endorsements, you get a lot more information. And then you can look me up on Facebook, The Rookie Father, same address for Instagram, and I'm author Kendall on Twitter.
All right. Very good. Kendall, it was very nice talking to you. All the best with the book.
Thanks so much, Michael. Appreciate it.